The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the patio of the small independent cafe, creating a patchwork of light and dark on the red brick floor. The usual post-lunch crowd had thinned out, leaving a peaceful ambiance filled with the gentle hiss of the espresso machine and the low murmur of a few remaining customers tapping away on their laptops. It was the kind of place where people came to escape the noise of the city, a quiet sanctuary in the middle of a bustling street. Sarah Jenkins, the 19-year-old barista working the counter, was enjoying the lull. She wiped down the polished wood surface and rearranged the cups, her mind drifting to the biology exam she had next week. She had worked at the Grindstone for just over a year, and she loved the early evening shifts when the pace slowed down and she could actually talk to the regulars. Across the room, nestled in the corner by the window, sat a woman who looked completely out of place in the corporate casual environment of the cafe. Her name was Marcus, though most people just called her Mark. She was reading a well-worn paperback, a cup of black coffee growing cold at her elbow. To the casual observer, she was unremarkable. A woman in her late 40s with close-cropped gray hair, a faded denim jacket, and a stillness about her that seemed almost unnatural. She wasn't browsing her phone or people-watching. She was simply present, her gaze occasionally flicking up from her book to scan the room with a calm, detached awareness that missed nothing. She saw the young mother struggling with a stroller, the elderly man carefully counting out change for a scone, and the three men who had just pushed through the front door, bringing a wave of loud laughter and bravado with them. The three men, probably in their mid-20s, were clearly looking for trouble. They wore expensive sneakers and hoodies, and they moved with the swagger of people used to taking up space. They approached the counter, ignoring the queue, and one of them slapped a hand on the counter, making Sarah jump. "Yo, we need 3 of the biggest, baddest coffees you got, and make it snappy," he said, his voice unnecessarily loud. Sarah, flustered, politely explained that there was a line and asked if they wouldn't mind waiting their turn. The man's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. "What did you just say to me?" he snapped, leaning forward. His two friends snickered behind him, their eyes scanning the cafe for reactions, looking for an audience. The easy target had been found, a young girl alone behind a counter. Marcus watched the scene unfold from her corner, her book now resting on the table. She didn't move, but her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. She was no longer a customer reading a book. She was an observer, cataloging threats, calculating distances, and waiting. She knew, with the certainty of hard-won experience, that this situation was about to escalate. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had dealt with difficult customers before, people who were rude about their order or impatient with the wait. But this was different. This was a targeted aggression, a deliberate attempt to intimidate. The man, whose name she would later learn was Derek, continued to berate her. "You think you're too good to serve us? You think we're not good enough for your fancy little shop?" He was jabbing a finger in the air, his voice dripping with contempt. His friends, a stocky guy with a shaved head and a thin one with a tattoo crawling up his neck, flanked him, their postures aggressive. The few other customers in the cafe looked away, studiously avoiding eye contact. A man with a laptop quickly packed up his things and slipped out the door, not wanting to get involved. The elderly gentleman with the scone shuffled further into his corner, pulling his coat tighter around himself as if to make himself smaller. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by Derek's raised voice. Sarah tried to remain calm, remembering her training. "Sir, I'm happy to serve you. I just need you to wait your turn like everyone else," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. This was the wrong thing to say. The thin man, whose name was Kyle, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Listen to the little mouse squeak," he taunted. Derek, encouraged by the lack of resistance, leaned further over the counter. "You need to learn some respect," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. This is how you treat customers. Maybe someone needs to teach you a lesson." The implication in his words was clear, and the casual menace in his tone sent a chill down the spines of everyone who heard it. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She was terrified, but she was also angry. How could they do this? How could everyone just sit there and watch? It was in that moment of absolute isolation, when she felt most alone, that a calm, steady voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I think it's time for you to leave." The voice came from the corner. Marcus was now standing, her book left on the table. She walked towards the counter, not with the swagger of the three men, but with an economy of motion, a fluid grace that spoke of immense physical control. Her footsteps were silent on the brick floor. Derek spun around, a look of disbelief on his face. He saw a lone woman, older, smaller, and apparently defenseless. A wide grin spread across his face. "And who the hell are you?" "Her bodyguard?" he scoffed, turning to his friends for validation. They laughed on cue, the sound hollow in the tense air. "Listen, lady," the stocky friend, whose name was Mark, chimed in. "Why don't you go back to your knitting and mind your own business before you get hurt?" The threat hung in the air, ugly and direct. Marcus stopped a few feet away from them. She was close enough to be a target, close enough to be reached, but far enough to have a split second of reaction time. She ignored Mark and fixed her gaze on Derek, the leader. Her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They weren't angry or fearful. They were completely, utterly calm. It was the calm of a deep ocean, a stillness that held unimaginable power beneath the surface. "I'm not her bodyguard," she said, her voice low and even, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I'm a customer who is tired of watching 3 children bully a child. The show is over. Leave." Her words were chosen with precision, each one a dart aimed at their fragile egos. The use of the word children was deliberate, a psychological tactic designed to undermine their posturing. Derek's face flushed with rage. The sneer vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He took a step towards her, his fists clenching at his sides. He was going to teach this interfering woman a lesson she would never forget. Derek took another step forward, closing the distance between them to just a few feet. He was banking on his physical presence to intimidate her, on the sheer fact that he was a man. He was bigger, and he was angry. He puffed out his chest, getting right in her face. "You need to learn when to keep your mouth shut, old lady," he snarled, the stale scent of energy drinks on his breath. His friends hung back, smirking, waiting for the fun to begin. They expected her to back down, to shrink away, just to apologize. That's what people always did. But Marcus didn't move. She didn't flinch. She looked up at him, her gaze never wavering from his. To Derek, looking into her eyes was like looking into the eyes of a shark. There was no fear there, no hesitation, only a patient, waiting awareness. In that split second, 1,000 hours of training kicked in. Marcus saw everything. His lead foot, his open stance, the telltale shift of his weight that preceded a strike. She had seen it 100 times on 100 different training mats and, more vividly, on dusty streets half a world away. He was a novice, an amateur playing a game he didn't understand. What happened next was so fast that later, when recounting the story, no one could agree on the exact sequence. There was no wind-up, no dramatic pause. 1 second, Derek was looming over her. The next, he was on the ground, gasping for air, his arm twisted at a painful angle behind his back. Marcus had not thrown a punch. She had simply flowed. When he reached out to shove her, she had flowed around his arm like water, using his own momentum against him. A subtle redirection of his elbow, a precise step that placed her behind him, and a swift, efficient application of pressure to his wrist and shoulder had dropped him to his knees and then flat on his face in less than 2 seconds. The move was so clean, so effortless, it looked like a magic trick. Kyle and Mark stared, their jaws literally dropping open. The smirks vanished from their faces, replaced by utter confusion. They hadn't even seen her move. One moment their friend was about to push her, the next he was eating dust. Derek let out a muffled, pained cry against the floor. Marcus didn't look down at him. She didn't need to. He was neutralized. Instead, she looked up at the other two, her expression unchanged, her breathing even. She hadn't even broken a sweat. "Your friend is about to dislocate his shoulder," she stated, her voice calm and instructive, as if she were explaining a recipe. "If he struggles, it will happen. It's a simple biomechanical fact. You should probably tell him to stop moving." Her eyes held theirs, and in that look, they saw the truth. They were not dealing with a helpless woman. They were dealing with a predator, an apex creature that had just demonstrated with terrifying clarity the gap between them. The sight of their friend, a guy who had seemed so big and tough just seconds ago, and writhing helplessly on the floor of a coffee shop, completely broke them. Kyle held his hands up, palms out, a universal gesture of surrender. Okay, just let him go," he stammered, his voice cracking. Mark was already backing away towards the door, his face pale. The bravado was gone, replaced by the pure, unthinking panic of prey. They didn't understand what had just happened, but their lizard brains were screaming at them to get away from this woman. Marcus looked down at Derek. "I'm going to release your arm," she said quietly, her voice for him alone. "When I do, you're going to get up and you're going to walk out that door with your friends. You're not going to say another word. You're not going to look back. You're going to leave, and you're going to think very carefully about what just happened. I nod if you understand." Derek, his face contorted in pain and humiliation, managed a tiny, jerky nod. She released the pressure, and he scrambled to his feet, clutching his arm. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at Sarah. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his face burning with a shame far more painful than his wrenched shoulder. He stumbled toward the door, his friends falling in beside him, and the three of them practically fell out onto the street, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft click. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of shock, of awe, of collective breath held and then slowly released. The elderly man in the corner let out a long, shaky exhale. The young mother, who had been frozen behind her stroller, stared at Marcus with wide, wondering eyes, and Sarah, still behind the counter, felt the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. But they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of an overwhelming sense of deliverance. She had never felt so protected in her entire life. Marcus walked calmly to the counter as if she had just asked for a napkin. The intensity was gone from her eyes, replaced by a gentle warmth. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, sliding it across the polished wood. "I'm sorry about the disturbance," she said to Sarah, her voice now soft, kind. "That coffee's cold. Could I trouble you for a fresh one? And maybe a glass of water for yourself? You look like you could use it." Sarah could only nod, her hands trembling as she took the money. She fumbled with the cup, her mind reeling. Who was this woman? A superhero? A guardian angel? The questions burned on her tongue. As Marcus waited for her coffee, the other customers began to stir. The man who had hidden behind his laptop, now feeling a surge of belated courage, came over and clapped his hands together. "That was incredible!" he exclaimed. "You handled those thugs like a ninja. Were you in the military? Special forces? You must have been, right? A black belt in something?" His questions tumbled out, loud and eager, breaking the sacred quiet of the moment. Marcus accepted the fresh cup of coffee from Sarah with a small smile of thanks. She turned to the man, her expression polite but firm. She simply raised a finger to her lips, a gentle but unmistakable gesture for silence. "The best fights," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won truth. "You're the ones people don't talk about." She took a sip of her coffee, savoring the warmth. She gave Sarah one last, reassuring nod, a silent message that said, "You're safe now. It's over." Then she turned and walked out of the cafe, her departure as calm and unassuming as her arrival. She didn't look back. She simply melted back into the late afternoon crowd on the street, a ghost, a guardian, a quiet professional who had momentarily stepped out of the shadows to restore order, and then disappeared. She left behind a room full of stunned people, a young girl's profound gratitude, and the lingering, powerful memory of a lesson learned. Never mistake stillness for weakness, and never, ever underestimate the quiet ones.